The Pac-12 is on life support with UCLA and USC leaving to go to the Big Ten. There's no doubt about it. The future of the Pac-12 is unknown. However, don't write the obituary for the Pac-12 just yet. It's not over. I'm Steven Lasson. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Steven L. CFB. I'm going to tell you how the Pac-12 can survive this round of expansion and realignment, and also what's next in college football expansion and realignment for the summer of 2022. Before we dive into the plan on how to save the Pac-12 and how the conference can survive, let's take a look at the latest in college football conference realignment and expansion. Obviously, the headliner is uncertainty remains in the Pac-12. Plenty of rumors have been floating for this conference over the last week since USC and UCLA left to go to the Big Ten. Oregon, Washington mentioned for the Big Ten. You also have the rumors of the Big 12 taking 6 of the Pac-12's teams, including Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, Washington, and Oregon. Obviously, Notre Dame still holds the cards to all of expansion and realignment. If the Fighting Irish want to join a conference, that would set off other dominoes, including the SEC and Big Ten in terms of expansion. And also, we have to keep in mind, what exactly does the television networks want in all of this too? ESPN and Fox play a huge role in the finances for conferences, and as expansion and realignment play out, with the Big 12 and Pac-12 both up for television deals about the same time, where ESPN and Fox want to put their money and the teams is something that could impact both conferences and all conferences going forward. And finally, one other thing that's been in the news recently is potential mergers and partnerships. This could be the ACC and the Pac-12 working together. This could be the Big 12 and the Pac-12 in a potential merger. There's a lot out there, but so far, the only thing that's happened is USC and UCLA have left the Pac-12 to go to the Big Ten. How can the Pac-12 survive this round of realignment and expansion? Of course, a lot has been said that the Pac-12 is done. The Pac-12 won't be a Power 5 conference in the future. However, it's not over for the Pac-12 just yet. This is the path that the conference can take to remain intact. The first thing the league has to do is convince Oregon and Washington that the Pac-12 is still the best place for these two programs. If a Big Ten invitation is not coming, which according to some reports it's not likely to happen, those two programs have to decide whether the Pac-12 or the Big 12 is the place to be. If the Pac-12 can convince those two programs, which are the best remaining programs in the Pac-12 in terms of brand value, in terms of just program strength, then that's a huge win for the Pac-12. That would potentially keep Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado in the fold. Once the Pac-12 can lock down its membership and ensure that those 10 teams are going to stick together, the conference can continue to make progress on a media deal. This week, the Pac-12 Board of Directors was authorized the conference to negotiate its media rights deal, which could be a new deal with ESPN. So having a lockdown membership would give the Pac-12 clarity for its media deal. And of course, with the time and the windows available for college football on Saturdays and throughout the weekend, the Pac-12's place in college football and Saturday viewing is important. So there would be those windows, and there is a commodity and especially an interest among ESPN in keeping the Pac-12 in the fold. So it's important to lock down Oregon and Washington, which in turn can lock down Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado. And in turn, those two decisions would help the conference make progress on a media deal. In tandem with the media deal, the Pac-12 could also consider some sort of short-term grant of rights to ensure that the conference would stick together for the next 10 to 15 years, much like we're seeing out of the ACC. Also, the conference could consider some sort of uneven revenue distribution. This could go to teams like Oregon and Washington, Utah, especially with its success in football recently too. So maybe there's some sort of uneven revenue distribution that the Pac-12 could use to incentivize some of its top programs to stick around. So the bottom line for the Pac-12 is really this: no decision about expansion, whether or not to stay at 10, can be made until the conference knows which teams are in the league for 2024, 2025, and beyond. They also need to have some idea of potential revenue projections and also a plan from the conference commissioner and everyone in the league to ensure that this league can continue to exist without USC and UCLA. So what happens if the Pac-12 can make all of those things work? The first decision that the conference would have to make after locking down its 10 members is what's next. Can the conference just remain a 10-team league? This is sort of what the Big 12 has done in recent years, just going with 10 teams, play 9 conference games. You match up your 2 best teams at the end of the year in the conference championship game. It's really going back to the Pac-10. So in terms of revenue and concerns about money to some of the top programs, if you don't add 2 more teams, there's obviously 2 fewer teams to give out money to in terms of distribution. So a 10-team conference could be appealing as the Pac-12 tries to make up some revenue from the loss of USC and UCLA. In terms of expansion, the Pac-12 could make a push for some of those Big 12 teams: Texas Tech, Baylor, BYU, which is joining the league in 2023, Oklahoma State, Kansas. Right now, the Big 12 seems to have more stability, and those teams don't appear to have a lot of interest in joining the Pac-12 right now. Of course, there's also the television network angle to this as well. So we'll have to see if there's any interest among Big 12 teams and some of the TV networks pushing them into the Pac-12. If the Pac-12 wants to expand and no teams from the Big 12 want to join, then the expansion candidates become clear. This could be San Diego State, Boise State, Fresno State, maybe even a team like SMU from the American Athletic Conference. If the Pac-12 decides not to expand, one other option that has been mentioned in the last week has been a potential merger with the Big 12. Obviously, that's a long shot because, as we've seen in college football, conferences and teams make decisions that is just solely based on what's good for them. So asking 2 leagues to work together, even though it might be in their best interest, is probably a long shot. And finally, there could be a partnership with the ACC, also known as the Alliance Part 2. CBS Sports mentioned a potential for the ACC and Pac-12 to play a championship game in Las Vegas. There's also been rumblings of non-conference games. It's uncertain how realistic that this partnership would be with the ACC, what exactly it means, what exactly the details are. But in terms of making up revenue, getting creative, the ACC and Pac-12 are 2 conferences that need to do it, especially the ACC, which is locked into a long-term television contract and is falling behind in revenue to the SEC and Big Ten. So creative options, everything should be on the table for the Pac-12. Mergers, partnerships are interesting, but first they have to lock down those members and decide whether or not to stay at 10 or whether it's in their best interest to expand. Let's sum up where we are right now in realignment and expansion and take a look at what's next. Notre Dame is still the biggest domino in realignment and expansion right now. If the Fighting Irish want to join a league, the Big Ten, SEC, or the ACC, that could have ramifications across the sport. So keep an eye on Notre Dame, and if there's any news one way or the other out of South Bend, if the Fighting Irish join a conference, there will be major chaos in expansion and realignment the rest of summer. The next thing to watch is what happens in the Pac-12. Will Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and Arizona State stick in the Pac-12 or Pac-10, I guess, at that point, as Oregon and Washington are also deciding their conference home? So Oregon and Washington deciding to stay in the Pac-12 would impact significantly the decisions by Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah on whether or not to join the Big 12 or stay in the Pac-12. The Big 12 is being aggressive in expansion in trying to add teams from the Pac-12, but if it doesn't land any teams from the Pac-12, it doesn't look like the Big 12 will look elsewhere in expansion right now. So the Pac-12 teams deciding where their conference home was will bring some clarity to two conferences. And finally, there's one wild card, which is we've talked about Notre Dame, the Big Ten, and the SEC. Could either of those conferences decide to expand more? This could be with North Carolina, Clemson, Florida State. There's some teams on the board in the ACC, which is obviously with a grant of rights. Those teams won't be on the move anytime soon. It will be interesting to see if anybody decides to challenge the grant of rights from the ACC and any of those teams decide to potentially test the waters and see what a potential move to the Big Ten or SEC could do. Realignment and expansion in college football is certainly not over. It's likely to dominate the headlines all offseason. One thing is for sure, we keep saying it, there's uncertainty, there's chaos. That's the two things that are certain right now in college football. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Facebook. I'm going to be staying on top of this story all offseason right here, Stephen L., CFB, College Football, Realignment and Expansion. News will not stop.